Welcome to this deep dive into the world of Amazon. We're going to be talking about how they became the global giant they are today. And we've got some great sources for you. We're using Brad Stone's book, The Everything Store, and excerpts from The Everything War by Dana Mattioli. These books, they go way beyond just timelines and, the dry stuff. They offer these amazing glimpses into, like, the company's culture, Bezos's personality, and kind of the ripple effects of their business practices.
Yeah, what's so interesting is that these sources really reveal how the company evolved from starting as a scrappy startup in a cramped Seattle office to this force that's reshaping entire industries and sparking some pretty intense debates.
Exactly. We're going to uncover stories about their work culture, the decisions that help them expand, and the tactics they use to beat the competition. We're also going to look into the controversies and the growing concerns about their power. By the end, you'll understand more deeply how Amazon got here, and you'll be able to form your own opinions.
Yeah, it's a journey that really makes you think about the trade-offs between convenience, affordability, and the potential consequences of concentrated power.
Okay, so let's rewind. Back to the early days, the mid-90s. E-commerce is like a baby, and people are hesitant to trust online transactions. The Everything Store paints a picture of Bezos, driven by this vision of selling Earth's biggest selection of goods. Ambitious, right? But it wasn't all smooth sailing.
They faced a lot of skepticism from investors, especially when they decided to go public, while they were still losing money. And internally, there were definitely tensions. Some of those early employees, like Shel Kafan, their first engineer, they had these idealistic visions that clashed with Bezos's, let's just say, more aggressive approach, which was, increasingly influenced by Wall Street.
And that clash of cultures becomes even more apparent after the IPO, as Amazon started attracting MBAs and embracing a more corporate structure. Priorities began to shift.
Right. And it's fascinating how this influx of MBAs, almost symbolized by everyone switching from jeans and T-shirts to khakis and button-downs, coincided with the introduction of this idea of stack ranking. So managers were now forced to rank their employees. And you know what? This created this super cutthroat environment. I mean, some employees even resorted to sleeping under their desks just to keep up.
Wow. This intense competition internally, it seems to reflect Bezos's ambition out in the market too. I mean, he famously said that Amazon's total addressable market was everyone else's operating margin, basically saying he saw any profitable business as potential territory for expansion.
And it's important to note that Amazon wasn't just going out and buying existing businesses like a typical conglomerate does. They were building most of their empire from scratch, strategically expanding into music, toys, electronics. They even hosted entire websites for big companies like Toys, Us, and Target.
Yeah, that was smart. Instead of starting from zero, they went straight to these established markets. And their profits, they just exploded. They became the ultimate one-stop shop. But this aggressive expansion also laid the groundwork for, concerns about monopolistic behavior. That would come up later on.
Right, and it wasn't just how much they were expanding, but how they were doing it. Their approach to conglomeration, it was really different. It wasn't just acquiring companies. They were building this powerful flywheel effect. Each new venture, whether it was selling books or launching AWS, generated tons of data. And that data could be used by other parts of the company, giving them this huge competitive advantage.
Okay, so this is where some might say things took a bit of a ruthless turn. They started launching their own private label brands like Amazon Basics, offering cheaper versions of name brands. On the surface, this seems pretty standard, right? Like any other retailer.
Yeah, on the surface it does. But the Everything War reveals a different side. Internal documents actually suggest that Amazon was allegedly using data from their third-party sellers, like information about what products were selling well, their profit margins, even how much they were spending on advertising. And then they'd use this information to create their own competing products, often undercutting the very sellers that were, making their marketplace successful in the first place.
Whoa, talk about playing hardball. And Mattioli's book dives even deeper into how Amazon allegedly used their power to crush competitors. The story of Quidsi, the company behind Diapers.com, that's a really striking example.
Oh, absolutely. Amazon engaged in what some call predatory pricing, dropping the price of diapers to a point where no one could compete. It backed Quidsi into a corner. They had to either sell to Amazon or risk going bankrupt.
That's a tough choice. And this tactic, as the Everything War points out, it kind of reminds you of what Standard Oil did back in the day, the oil giant that was eventually broken up under antitrust laws.
Right. And then there are these accounts from entrepreneurs
Mm.
who claim that Amazon used their Alexa fund, which is, their venture capital arm that invests in voice tech startups, to basically get a hold of their ideas and then copy them, which, stifles any potential rivals.
So we're seeing this pattern.
Yeah.
Expansion, leveraging data, and, some might say aggressive tactics to solidify their dominance. But what about the consequences? That's what we're going to get into next.
Yeah, next we're going to explore the backlash, the emergence of Lina Khan, who really challenged their power, and the political battles that led them to face off with Congress.
Okay, so we've seen how Amazon went from, this small startup to a massive empire.
Yeah.
But as their power grew, so did the attention they were getting, the
Yeah.
scrutiny. And it's kind of interesting how one person, a law student at the time, really shifted how people were looking at them.
Yeah, Lina Khan. She wrote this article in 2017 for the Yale Law Journal called Amazon's Antitrust Paradox, and it really changed the whole conversation. Her argument was basically challenging how everyone was interpreting antitrust law, which for decades was all about focusing on prices for consumers.
So even if a company became like a total monopoly, it didn't matter as long as, we were getting cheap stuff.
Basically, yeah. That approach was called the Consumer Welfare Standard. It came from the ideas of this influential legal scholar, Robert Bork. His argument, which got really popular in the 70s, was that as long as a company's actions led to lower prices for consumers, everything was cool, even if it meant, squashing the competition.
Interesting. So Khan was saying this narrow focus on getting the lowest prices was like missing the bigger picture, that it ignored the damage these powerful companies could do to the market in the long run.
Exactly. She said they could use their power to squeeze suppliers, stifle innovation, and eventually hurt consumers down the line, even if prices stayed low at first. She was drawing comparisons to Standard Oil, the oil giant that got broken up under antitrust laws back in the early 1900s. She said Amazon was doing something similar, using their size and power to call the shots, control a game, and potentially harm the whole market.
And it seems like her argument really struck a nerve. It was like she gave a voice to this growing unease people were feeling about big tech, part of this whole techlash thing we started seeing.
It did. Khan's article wasn't just some academic paper. It captured this public concern about the influence of these huge tech companies. It wasn't just about our shopping habits anymore. It was about our data, our privacy, even democracy.
Right. There were scandals with social media, data breaches, worries about misinformation. It all added to this feeling that maybe these companies had gotten too big, too powerful.
And Amazon, even though they had this image of being customer-friendly, they got caught in the middle of it. Their secretive way of doing things, their sometimes difficult relationship with the press didn't really help.
So they knew they had to change their approach.
They did. That's when they hired Jay Carney, President Obama's former press secretary. He was going to lead their public relations and lobbying efforts in Washington.
Hiring Carney, it was like a signal. They were finally admitting they needed to work with the government, try to influence the decisions that could affect their business.
But it wasn't all easy. Even with Carney's connections, they had a tough time, especially with the Trump administration.
Oh, yeah. President Trump was very open about his criticisms of Amazon. He accused them of not paying enough taxes and even targeted Bezos personally because of, him owning the Washington Post.
It was a tricky situation. Amazon trying to build relationships in Washington, but also dealing with this unpredictable and, often hostile political scene.
And trying to manage that political landscape didn't always work out. Remember that whole thing where they tried to discredit Chris Smalls, the warehouse worker who organized a protest about COVID safety?
Yeah, that was a PR disaster. They tried to say he wasn't smart or articulate, which totally backfired. It just reinforced this idea of Amazon as a company that put profits before their workers.
It seemed like they were trying to control the story, but it just blew up. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. That was a huge shift for everyone, including Amazon.
For sure. The pandemic sped up everyone moving to online shopping, and Amazon was in the perfect position to benefit. Their profits went through the roof, but so did the concerns about their power. Bezos' personal wealth exploded while tons of small businesses were struggling just to survive.
It really showed that growing gap. The retail apocalypse that was already happening became impossible to ignore. And the calls for more regulation of big tech, Amazon included, got louder.
Yeah, it all led to that congressional hearing in July 2020, the one where Bezos was finally questioned under oath about Amazon's business practices.
The House Judiciary Antitrust Subcommittee really put him on the spot. They grilled him about using third-party seller data, how they treated competitors, and their aggressive tactics for expanding.
And to be honest, Bezos' performance didn't really help them look good. He dodged a lot of questions, and it seemed like he didn't know much about certain parts of the business. It raised a lot of eyebrows.
I remember one of the most memorable moments was when Congressman David Sisling, who was leading the hearing, basically accused Amazon of lying to Congress during a previous testimony.
Yeah, that was a turning point. It felt like they were finally being held accountable.
And it set the stage for the FTC investigation, which eventually became a full-blown lawsuit against Amazon.
Right. And now with Lina Khan leading the FTC, it was like a clash of the titans.
So we left off with the FTC, with Lina Khan at the helm, ready to take on Amazon in this huge antitrust case. It felt like, a test of whether those old ideas about antitrust law still worked in the world of big tech.
Yeah, it was a big moment. Everyone was watching to see if Khan's vision for like a more aggressive approach to antitrust, if that would actually hold up in court.
So what exactly was the FTC's lawsuit about? I remember a lot of talk about Prime, like maybe that was stifling competition, but the lawsuit actually went in a different direction, right?
Right. There was a lot of speculation about Prime, but the lawsuit they filed in September 2023, it ended up focusing on two main things: Amazon's seller fees and how much control they had over pricing on the platform.
Okay, let's break those down. First, the seller fees. I know Amazon takes a cut from each sale made by like those third-party sellers on their platform, but what was the FTC's problem with that?
The FTC was arguing that Amazon was using their power, their dominance in the market, to charge these super high fees to sellers, basically squeezing their profits. And because those sellers didn't have many other options, they often had to raise prices for us, the consumers, which, kind of goes against the whole idea that Amazon always has the lowest prices.
So they were saying that Amazon being so dominant was actually making prices higher, not lower, like the opposite of what they always claimed.
Exactly. It challenged that core idea that had protected companies like Amazon for so long. That idea that as long as customers were getting low prices, it didn't matter how powerful a company became. The FTC was basically saying, hey, focusing only on cheap prices ignores the bigger damage Amazon's doing to the whole market.
Got it. And the second part of the lawsuit, the control over pricing, what was that about?
That was about Amazon basically punishing sellers who dared to offer their products at lower prices on other platforms. Like if a seller had a lower price on their own website or on a competitor site, Amazon would bury their listings, make them hard to find for customers. The FTC argued that this was totally anti-competitive and was squashing competition across the entire e-commerce world.
So if a seller wanted to, say, offer a discount on their own site, they risked being penalized by Amazon.
Yeah, that was the argument, yeah. The FTC was saying that Amazon was using their control over the buy box, that, prominent spot on a product page where people usually click to buy. By messing with that, Amazon could basically control what price consumers sought and pressure sellers to keep their prices the same everywhere.
It sounds like the FTC was trying to address this issue of Amazon using their power in one area, the marketplace, to control competition everywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. They were saying Amazon was using their dominance to stifle competition and innovation across the whole e-commerce ecosystem.
But Amazon didn't just sit back and take it, did they? They fought back pretty hard.
Oh, absolutely. They went all out. They used their massive resources and all their lawyers to challenge everything the FTC was saying. They said they were just running a fair marketplace and that everything they did was ultimately good for consumers.
So basically, their argument was, we're great, customers love us, and we're not doing anything wrong.
Pretty much, yeah. They kept talking about the value they offered, low prices, convenience, tons of products to choose from. They said their seller fees were reasonable and that everything they did was to make sure the marketplace was fair and transparent for both buyers and sellers.
Did the lawsuit address some of those other accusations we talked about, like Amazon maybe stealing ideas from startups or using data from third-party sellers to, create their own competing products?
What's interesting? It didn't. The FTC's lawsuit was super focused on Amazon's role as a marketplace operator. It didn't go into those other things, even though those were a big part of the congressional hearings.
So it was a very specific legal strategy, zeroing in on what they saw as the heart of Amazon's anti-competitive actions. So where do things stand now with the lawsuit?
It's still ongoing. It's a complicated case and will probably take years to play out.
And the bigger picture. Did this case change how we think about antitrust law in the digital age? Has Lina Khan's vision for a tougher approach to antitrust been successful?
It's hard to say for sure right now. The FTC has definitely been more active under Khan, but they've also hit some roadblocks. Like they weren't able to stop Microsoft from buying Activision Blizzard, which was a big one for them.
So things are still changing, And the outcome of this Amazon case could really impact how antitrust laws are applied to all these tech giants in the future.
Definitely. Everyone's watching this case closely, and it could set a precedent for future actions against other big tech companies.
So where does all of this leave us? We've looked at Amazon's rise, the tactics they've been accused of, and this big lawsuit. What does it all mean for our listener? What should they take away from this deep dive?
I think it shows how important it is to be informed and critical as consumers. Amazon's changed how we shop, there's no doubt about that. It's so convenient, we have access to so many products, but their dominance raises some serious questions about who has the power in this digital world.
It makes you think about the trade-offs, right? The convenience, the affordability, it often comes at the expense of smaller businesses and maybe even slows down innovation.
It also makes us think about what role we want these tech giants to play in our lives and society. Do we want a few companies to have this much control over everything? Or are there better ways to do things, ways that would create more competition and a more level playing field?
Those are big questions, no easy answers. But the more we know about how these companies work, the better choices we can make as consumers and, as citizens.
Yeah, and we can push for policies that promote a fair system, one that benefits everyone, not just a few powerful companies.
Well said. This deep dive into Amazon's empire has been fascinating. We've seen their successes, their controversies, and this ongoing battle to figure out where they fit in the digital world. We hope you found it insightful and, something to really think about.
And remember, this is just the start of the conversation. What happens with Amazon, with the whole tech industry, it's still unfolding. And we, as consumers and citizens, we have a say in shaping that future.